Ukraine is being outgunned and outmanned in its effort to stop Russia's takeover in the eastern Donbass region and are losing grip on a key eastern city. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter reports.
This morning, Russian forces inching closer to encircling the city of Severodonetsk. Ukraine's President Zelensky says the fighting is for every meter of that city, now almost entirely under Russian control, with an estimated 10,000 civilians still inside. Russian state media showing smoke rising from the Ukrainian-controlled Azot chemical plant, where the regional governor says about 500 people, including dozens of children, are sheltering. In nearby villages, as the fighting creeps closer, not everyone wants to evacuate. Luba says, "Sweetheart, where can I go? Who is waiting for me there? Let others go. They are young." President Zelensky says Russia can still be stopped, but with more weapons. One of his advisors tweeting out their military wish list overnight. But President Putin saying if more longer-range weapon systems were supplied to Ukraine, we will use our means of destruction, which we have plenty of. Over the weekend, an advisor to President Zelensky suggesting to the BBC as many as 200 Ukrainian soldiers were dying every day. Combined with the wounded, Ukraine may be losing some 700 fighters from the battlefield daily. But those still fighting are determined. Filmmaker turned frontline soldier Elisa Kovalenko was in the eastern city of Kharkiv for a 12-hour break.
When you're exhausted, completely exhausted, because after it was very, very intensive months. At a moment you can be so exhausted, so you can make a mistake and you can be dead.
But for Elisa, there's no question she's going back.
I still have power to go back to the front line.
Let's bring in the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. Richard, it just looks like a deadlock. No reason for either side to give in right now. Take us through it.
Well, it's a deadlock in the sense that neither side's prepared to compromise for peace, but it's not a deadlock on the ground. And what we're seeing, and I think that report captured it, Joe, is at some point quantity overwhelms quality. And I would argue the Ukrainians have pound for pound or higher quality military. But now that the war is basically being fought in a relatively confined space, the sheer quantity of Russian arms and armor is beginning to grind the Ukrainians down, which is why you see President Zelensky and others pleading for as quickly as possible various longer-range systems come into their hands, because that way they can deal with the Russian forces from a greater distance. But I would say the last 2 weeks or so have been the worst 2 weeks of the war for Ukraine, and the fact that things are going well for the Russians, there's zero chance that Mr. Putin is interested in stopping a war that he feels is finally going in his direction. And the Ukrainians have zero interest in stopping a war. They've already lost over 20% of their territory. If you add up what they lost in 2014 and what they've lost in the last 3 or 4 months, you simply don't have any of the prerequisites for diplomacy here.
Yeah, and if you look, Mika, on the ground, you have the Russians who at the beginning of the war spread themselves too thin. Yeah. They had far too many goals. They actually have consolidated, and they're moving slowly. They've slowed everything down strategically on the battlefield, and they are now finally grinding it out bit by bit, and they are making slow progress, but progress all of the same in eastern Ukraine.
So, Richard, let's get to your latest article in Foreign Affairs, which is entitled A Ukraine Strategy for the Long Haul. The West needs a policy to manage a war that will go on. And you write in part, quote, diplomatically, the Ukrainians have little interest in accepting Russian occupation of large swaths of their territory. Russian President Vladimir Putin, for his part, has little interest in agreeing to anything that could be judged at home to constitute defeat. The inescapable conclusion, then, is that this war will go on and on. The West thus needs a strategy for the long haul. While avoiding direct military involvement, the United States and Europe should keep providing Ukraine with the arms it needs, along with associated intelligence and training, so that it can frustrate Russian military actions and regain control of more of its territory. They should back Ukraine's goal of restoring its full territorial integrity through an open-ended policy of sanctions and diplomacy, while holding fast to their refusal to recognize any territory that Putin attempts to make part of Russia. And I guess my question is, what do you mean by that, including Crimea, territory that was taken years ago?
Possibility of Crimea, but also, Richard, let me just ask you, what do they need right now? I mean, they are losing ground right now. What does the West need to provide to Ukraine right now that they haven't?
Look, Ukraine needs more of what it's got, more rocket systems, more longer-range missiles. I actually still think it needs aircraft. I think at some point I'd love to give them the capability to go after those Russian ships in the Black Sea that are blockading the ports. What I'm trying to set out here is an argument that with military help of the sort I just described, I think Ukraine can hold off the Russians. I don't think, though, there's any chance that no matter how much military help we give Ukraine, they could ever get back Crimea or all of the Donbass or all of the South. So it's almost a divided strategy. We give a military force to hold off the Russians, and then it's got to be through sanctions and diplomacy. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think it happens under Vladimir Putin. This is a guy who's comparing himself to Peter the Great. And I think that this is going to be a long-haul thing, that Ukraine holds the line militarily now, and only probably with a subsequent Russian leadership do you basically say, you don't want to continue to be the pariah that Putin turned you into. And I think ultimately we try to make a deal with a future Russian leadership that might want to reintegrate Russia in Europe and the world. But I think Putin is hopeless, and I don't think we can solve this now. I think what we can do, though, is help Ukraine and keep it as a viable sovereign country.
So, Richard, let's say that the Russians continue to progress there in the Donbass, the Severodonetsk, and it does fall. What will that mean if that whole region does fall under Russian control? And are there fears here? We're starting to hear from some from the Ukrainians. Do we think then they would then consolidate that victory and attempt to move back into further to Ukraine, or do they stay put and hold that land?
That's the debate, whether this would be enough of a victory where Putin could say, this is what I was trying to do, and go for peace, and then they'd have a big debate in the West whether this is acceptable. My sense is not, or whether the Russians would use this as a platform to, in a sense, to resume the war on Kyiv. I don't rule that out. I think every once in a while we got to take our adversaries literally, and you listen to Putin. He has grandiose ambitions. He sees himself not as a Soviet leader, if you will. He's pre-Soviet. He sees himself in Russian terms, and he wrote about it last summer. He's talking about it now. He wants to create large swaths of the Russian Empire, so I take him seriously. My own sense is no matter what he agreed to, it would be tactical. He wants something more. He does not want an independent Ukraine, for example, ever being a viable democracy, much less joining the European Union. He does not want that example on his border.
So, Richard, stay with us. We have